Grateful that I got to be. I'm really grateful that I got to be here to hear your opening remarks, your land acknowledgement. That was just absolutely gorgeous. And I'm amazed that you have so many words represented here this evening. We all of us know how hard it is to organize anything and to organize it well. And I'm just thrilled that you're all coming together in the way that you are. Grateful to be a part of what you're trying to do, and really excited to see a lot of the strong experience and expertise in the room. I don't know everybody here, but pretty much every name I can recognize as a rock star. So I'm certain that the Q&A will bring forth a whole lot more wisdom than I can share in my segment, and that means I will try to get through it as efficiently as I can. Um, I do want to start out with just sort of a quick pursuit on your point about the overwhelming majority of people in Toronto supporting strong climate action and solutions. Among other things, the Energy Mix is an active participant in Covering Climate Now, which is a global news collaborative based in the US, but with publications and broadcast outlets around the world. And Covering Climate Now has launched a project that you can Google search called the 89% Project. If I remember correctly, it began on Earth Day and ran through this year's UN climate conference or a bit longer. And the 89% number comes from consistent polling in multiple countries around the world that shows that when asked, up to 89% of people in almost any country support climate action. They understand that climate is an issue and they want their governments to do something about it. Just today, I was on a call with somebody who suggested an angle on this that might or might not be useful to you, and that is that as advocates, instead of saying climate change is the crisis of our lifetimes and you need to do something about it, uh, an effective switch that's really easy, or at least to try out is really easy, is to say everyone knows we're facing climate change as the crisis of our lifetimes, and that everyone knows is a way of building momentum. Because if everybody thinks that everybody else knows, that's when you get a wave. I'm conveying this, not advocating it, because I just heard about it today. Haven't had a chance to research it. I probably, as person, did not expect me to mention it in a recorded webinar. But if it's useful, please let me know. If it's not useful, please let me know. Brief background on the Energy Mix. We've been in pretty much continuous production for about 11 and a half years, back to May 2014. If you told me 11 and a half years ago that I'd be going around saying that, I would have been terrified and also thought it was really hilarious. At this point, we have an indexed archive of more than 30,000 stories dating back to the beginning. And I emphasize it's an indexed archive. It's meant to be used not because we're trying to pull people in to click on the Energy Mix, but because we're here to be useful. We're here to try to support with reliable, informed, knowledgeable content, whatever anybody is trying to do to respond to the climate emergency and the opportunities and the solutions. Recently, we have really been working hard to build out and expand our work in the areas where we think we can have the greatest impact. And some of those include cities and communities policy for all the reasons that you know, because you're here today, climate finance, and misinformation and disinformation around climate change and as a wider trend and wider threat that we all face. We've been really leaning in as well into the role of independent journalism in protecting democracy, which is certainly not a highfalutin statement that I ever would have expected to be making in May 2014, but now here we are. And knowing that since those battles to undermine democracy, now to undermine Canadian sovereignty, are taking place in the climate space, we're focused on the role of independent climate journalism in protecting the even deeper values that the vast majority of us hold in common. So one of the things I know you wanted to address today is what is the starting point for so many conversations around a program like Transform TO. At least once tonight, I'm going to accidentally call it Transport TO. So watch for that and feel free to laugh at me. Um, what climate action costs, whether it's through Transform TO, whether it's through our counterpart in Ottawa, the Energy Evolution Program, and the number that I found online, the estimate that I found online, is that Transform TO is expected to cost $57 billion over 30 years. And I would do my Dr. Evil imitation, but my family says I never get it right. And with an estimated saving and avoided costs totaling $114 billion. So where's Dr. Evil now that we need him? Um, A key question that I could not easily answer online, but you all probably have at your fingertips, is how much new money this will actually require. How much of that $57 billion is just money that the community will spend anyway, one way or the other, over the next 25 years? The question isn't whether, but how we'll spend it on things like building renovations, both homes and commercial buildings, businesses, furnace replacements, buying a new vehicle, and how much of that can be defined as not being new city spending or new tax dollars. Um, I know in Ottawa, and I think I've understood from our preliminary conversations in Toronto as well, the high price tag was the headline when the program was introduced, and the high price tag became a real liability because it was a headline that you can't get out from under and can never properly explain because people's minds are in panic mode. $57 billion, that's a lot of money. Um, but the trade-off does reinforce what you already know. The number reinforces what you already know, that there's a lot to be done because cities are so central to the energy and climate transition. It's about buildings and transportation. We said we wouldn't talk about waste on this webinar because that's only about 9% of your inventory, and it's a short meeting, we hope. In buildings, the solutions are options like deep energy retrofits, heat pumps, high performance building standards for new construction. In transportation, it's electric vehicle infrastructure, bike lanes, transit, and especially, please, transit operating funds. Because governments love cutting ribbons on new electric buses and charging garages, and meanwhile, transit agencies are going bankrupt on their operating costs. We're hearing that public charging need not be the barrier that it's been made out to be in the transition in transportation out of fossil fuels and into electrification. Usually, when you own an EV, one way or another, you're charging at home or close to home. So, in many cases, the public charging is useful, but it's secondary and it needn't be an obstacle. The program needs to necessarily expand, and you're in Toronto, so you don't need me telling you about the flooding, the heat waves, the other impacts that we're living through already, and that you know are going to get worse before they get better. But climate adaptation absolutely has to be a part of the picture, a key part of the picture. And for bonus points, once you're going into the envelope of the building, once you're thinking through what to do next with the fleet, to try to deal with adaptation and emission reductions in the same initiative. The kind of municipal action that brings all of these needs and options together, techniques like sprawl prevention, where the value that might bring everyone together is, actually, no, I don't enjoy being stuck in traffic gridlock 2 hours each way each day. But then it also turns out that living in that far suburb, people will pay more for their commute over the time they live there than they save on the more affordable housing. So there are other urban planning and urban development options that are being constrained by the Ford government, but to whatever degree still fall within the authority of a municipal government. And when you prevent sprawl, you prevent tailpipe emissions, you prevent the incredibly extended supply lines that a larger community needs for everything from water to waste to everything else. And it becomes a more efficient community. I've seen statistics indicating that sprawl prevention can reduce a community's emissions by, I think it's about 30 to 50%, depending. But the numbers really can be in that magnitude. So, a big challenge is that so much of this crosses jurisdictions, and I know that both complicates it for cities. It also gives them someone else to blame. Oh, we're on board with you, but Doug Ford. So the challenge question back to councillors is, first of all, once again, what proportion of this is actually new money that you're going to have to find, as opposed to programs that help and inform and encourage people to reallocate the money we're already spending, either as households or as businesses or wherever we spend it. And then how can they step up as municipal leaders to help knit all of those pieces together? And then finally, how can we help? Rather than just coming in and saying, do this, or do this because there's an election coming up, how can we help? What have we got in a toolbox of climate and community solutions that'll enable us to stand beside you while you try to do this good thing for your community, for your constituents? You can, and I would argue it's a really good idea to remind them that there are so many examples of spending that does not come out of a climate envelope, but still serves some other primary that serves some other primary purpose, but still reduces emissions. So I know that sixplexes have been a hideous issue in Toronto, but sixplexes, as I was saying before, will help reduce sprawl, will help increase density, but it's gentle density. This isn't this choice between tall and sprawl that we've been given by conventional development. And those units can be more efficient, particularly if that is designed in from the very beginning. And the other thing that has to be designed in from the very beginning is that people not be gentrified out of their homes through renoviction. But that kind of strategy can mean reduced emissions and also lower costs for city services when you reduce the number of people who have no choice but to live farther away in sprawled suburbs. And in fact, this wasn't intentional, but it so happens that this week's edition of the Energy Mix Weekender, which you can find from our front page, does document about a dozen years of intermittent research on this issue that living farther out actually costs more once you factor in the commuting costs and that people are just by a small margin paying more for transportation than they are for housing, even in the middle of an affordable housing crisis. Much of the cost of an energy retrofit can be spread out over time. And I think I've heard that you have some recent research to that effect in Toronto. You can do that just by putting a little bit more thought and planning into routine maintenance and scheduled upgrades, and the energy savings will eventually exceed the cost of that incremental extra work. Because obviously, when you improve energy efficiency and thereby reduce emissions, um, you're also reducing the monthly energy bill, and frankly, reducing the number of households that will ever again have to choose between fuel and food. So there's a really powerful equity dimension to this as well. That kind of analysis and that kind of calculation won't likely give you the whole budget that you need to really get your building to net zero. But that's all the more reason to disclose and track how much of that is actually new funding and how much of it is just reallocated. And I'm about to cough, so I will cut my audio for just one second. A wonderful program that we've been following in Los Angeles is an initiative where there are a number of major events coming into the city over the next few years. They're getting part of the FIFA World Cup. I gather they're going to host the Super Bowl. I think I heard that's a football game or something. And as part of the infrastructure investment that's going on in preparation for these events, and of course you're living with that now with FIFA coming to Toronto. LA is investing in shade trees and other shading infrastructure for whole neighborhoods. I haven't heard specifically whether that is the vulnerable low-income neighborhoods that typically have the least shade, but even if LA isn't doing it that way, Toronto and any other community can. So factoring in tree equity, but also taking the opportunity, as I know you've been trying to do with rapid transit along Dufferin, I think, to say, okay, we have this mega event coming in. What does it leave behind? And a lot of that can be adaptation as well as improvement in essential municipal services like transit. I should mention as well that the Green Municipal Fund of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has recently launched an urban forestry and urban tree program. I'm certain people at the City of Toronto must know about that, but it is one more resource that might be available. In Toronto, the Novento wastewater energy transfer system at Toronto Western Hospital, I think is still under construction, but it's coming soon. It essentially captures the heat leaving the hospital in the sewer line, not just the heat in the waste, but the heat in the water that carries the waste out of the building. Recapturing that heat is an energy efficiency measure, and if it offsets gas, that means it's offsetting methane emissions that are 84%, 84 times, sorry, as potent a greenhouse gas. Have 84 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide over a 20-year span. So even a project like Toronto Western, where the actual saving in the scheme of things is relatively small, the fact that it's offsetting gas, the fact that it's offsetting future methane emissions makes it worth doing, worth learning from, worth demonstrating, and then most important, worth scaling. The question should be, if Toronto Western can do this, where else can other institutions of that size all across the GTHA do the same thing? And let's count up the emission savings. Finally, if you scan your own ward's needs for other examples, I guarantee you'll find them. And those opportunities, those options, will probably land better with your counselor if you prevent them as you present them as something that the community needs, with the emissions as the co-benefit. So by all means, go forward and talk to them about climate change. But you might find that you get farther faster with them if you say, we've really bought into this affordable housing project. We're really glad you're behind this co-op. Um, and by the way, once you do that, we'll also be reducing emissions, and we're happy to stand beside you and lend our weight to what you're trying to do, which then builds that working relationship for you. What's the cost of not acting? Once again, I don't get to sit here and lecture at you about the impacts you're already seeing, but you know the list, you know the litany, the flooding, the heat emergencies, the grid going out, people missing work, the public health, like really hideous public health and air quality issues, the impacts on ward infrastructure, like schools and community centers. The roof gets blown off a community center. In a tornado a few years ago, a roof from somewhere landed on a substation. And that was when a part of the grid in Ottawa went down. Schools that can't operate because it's too hot. I think many of us on this call can remember when air conditioning was not a prerequisite for a public school. And now we're getting there, if not already there. And with the provincial government looting $5 billion from the education system over the last number of years, it's not as though the TDSB has loads of money, even if they weren't under supervision, to start air conditioning every school. So these are all impacts that a ward councillor has to be concerned about. I think the even bigger win is in focusing on the value of taking action from the ground up and from outside our own bubble, bringing home the message to counselors or to anybody else you're talking with, that reducing emissions involves actions that are about opportunity and gain, not loss and pain. It's a line of thought that, as I was saying before, starts with what a ward or a counselor is trying to achieve, and then looks at what we have in a climate toolbox that will help them get there. For a business or industrial park, and this includes data centers, the decarbonization argument, and listen to where the words climate and change and crisis do not come into this, not initially. The argument to decarbonize a business or industrial park is that they need more energy very fast, it needs to be affordable, and it needs to be hyper reliable. And we have, by saying that, we have just defined solar plus storage and wind plus storage, and we've disqualified gas because its price is too volatile, it starts out too expensive, and at some point the system might not be reliable. Whereas if you have solar right nearby with batteries or some other form of storage, you're in much better shape. And there are businesses making that kind of decision or considering right now today. Um, if you were to go to the policy priorities of groups like the Toronto Board of Trade, the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, or the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, look through those priorities and see what wider lens they would be bringing into any conversation that you try to set up with them. And then start from the conversation that they want to have and find where is the common ground where a climate agenda and climate solutions are just a natural fit. Um, in trying to build support, and I'm certain you already know this, in trying to build council support, build the council majority that you need, um, pick a councillor who isn't already 100% on side. Right. And I certainly don't nearly know your whole council, but I know enough to know that you don't need to talk to Diane Sachs except to say thank you. She rocks every single day, and she has probably at some point written or commissioned some of the research that you're working from. But if you're looking for a counselor who represents your next tier of support, like maybe Counselor Fletcher, if you start from her ward priorities, not what's in her static biography, but the things she's been writing about recently, When I went to her website a few days ago, what I found was farmers market season, affordable housing and the red eviction bylaw, investing in infrastructure, pedestrian safety. And every single one of those, you can so easily connect the dots from what you want to talk about to what she wants to hear about. And that's where common ground is built. Um, Getting into this mindset that what we're looking for can be the co-benefit of what others are trying to do, even or especially if they aren't inside our bubble. I think I first heard the language co-benefit probably 30 or 35 years ago. And the argument was if you just join us in our climate or energy transition agenda, this other thing you want that's about health or affordability or equity or whatever it is, transportation access, you'll get that, but just join us. And 30 or 35 years later, I will suggest to you that it's still the case that for the vast majority of people, even accepting that the vast majority want climate change dealt with, we're the co-benefit. And if we start out from that recognition, we might be able to cover a lot more ground a lot faster and build more common ground along the way. And then finally, just one quick point, because I am a couple of minutes over time, I think. Um, it's so important. I know you're inoculated, but to inoculate yourselves and everyone you're working with against the organized misinformation and disinformation that we're already seeing in the municipal space. Be prepared to respond when, not if, it ramps up ahead of the 2026 municipal elections, because you know it will. And going right back to the idea of being the bulwark for the information that's real and being the bulwark for our democracy. I Earlier in this talk, I claimed that for journalism and for climate journalism, but it applies to every advocate as well. And maybe protecting your city is the ultimate co-benefit of finding common ground to talk to people about climate change. So I have gone over when I swore I wouldn't, but I'm going to stop right there. You've been extremely patient, and I really can't wait to hear what comes up in the Q&A.